This week's case is about the Axeman of New Orleans that was active from 1918 to 1919. This Axeman was never officially caught or identified, and the murders are still unsolved to this day. So, let's get started. Hello everyone! For those that are new here, my name is Brandy, and every Friday I bring you a true crime case or mystery with one or more of my fabulous felines. For my returning subscribers, welcome back my feline friends, and a big shout out to my feline fans who help support this channel. I do have my beautiful blue-eyed boy, Ghosty. Let me say hi. There you go. You get in a bed and lay there with Mom. Okay, about the case. So, starting in May of 1918 and continuing for 18 months, New Orleans, Louisiana was terrified by a serial killer they called the Axeman. Now, the Axeman would break into people's homes while they slept. So this isn't any just somebody getting attacked in a park or in public or at night on the streets. People weren't safe in their own homes. So the Axeman would pry open a panel on one of their doors and crawl through it and get access to their residence. Here's the other weird part. The Axeman didn't carry his own axe. He killed people and attacked people in their homes using the stuff in the victims' homes, which most likely was an axe because back in the early 1900s, everybody had an axe in their home. Now, the Axeman never took anything from the victims' homes either. He never robbed them or anything like that. And he actually would often leave the murder weapon behind, including the chisel he used to break through the door. Now, almost all of the victims were of Italian descent. So they were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans. And this led some people to believe that the Axemen's attacks were ethnically motivated. However, many believe that the Axemen's intended victims were actually women, and the only time that he would actually kill a man is when the man got in the way. So in total, 12 people were attacked in these 18 months. 6 survived, but 6 did not. So let's start working through the timeline by starting with the first victims. On May 23rd, 1918, an Italian grocer named Joseph Maggio and his wife Catherine were attacked in their bed. The intruder broke into their apartment and would slash Catherine's throat with a straight razor. Then he took an axe that he found on the couple's home and proceeded to bash their faces in. Surprisingly, Joseph survived the initial attack. Unfortunately, Catherine did not. But he was unable to move or call for help because his wife was actually dead on top of him. Now, a couple of hours later, Joseph's 2 brothers would come into Joseph's apartment and discover the scene. Unfortunately, Joseph would die just a few minutes after being discovered. Now, authorities descended upon the residence and started checking for clues. They found a pile of bloody clothing in the other room, so they saw that the killer actually changed their clothes before they left the scene. Police were able to rule out robbery as a motive because the couple's cash and jewelry and other valuable items were not touched. Now, a straight razor was found in the lawn of the neighboring residence, and police were able to determine that that straight razor actually belonged to Joseph's brother, Andrew. Now, Andrew ran a barbershop, hence why he had a straight razor. Now, they questioned an employee at Andrew's barbershop, and the employee stated that Andrew took a straight razor from the shop 2 days prior because it had a nick in it, and Andrew was going to fix it. Now, Andrew actually lived right next door to his brother Joseph and sister-in-law Catherine, and apparently they were some sort of adjoining type apartments because the straight razor was grabbed from Andrew's place. Now, Andrew said that when he awoke that early morning, he kept hearing groans kind of through the wall coming from his brother's room, and that's what made him go check on him. However, that was approximately 2 hours after the attack, apparently. Now, police were a little suspicious because the intruder did break into the apartment and chiseled away a panel on the door, and that would have made some noise. So they questioned why Andrew didn't hear the noise of them breaking through the door and the noise of the attack. Well, Andrew was getting deployed into the Navy, and him and his other brother went out to celebrate that night. So when Andrew got home, he was very intoxicated and said that he just passed out. Now, police did suspect Andrew had something to do with this murder, but in the end, there was no evidence for it, and he was no longer considered a suspect. A month later, another Italian grocer named Louis Bezemer and his lover, Annie Lowe, was attacked on June 27th, 1918. Now, Louis had a sleeping quarters in the back of his grocery store, and that's where he lived. So him and Annie were turning in for the night when they were attacked. In the early morning hours, Louis was struck with a hatchet. He was struck in the right temple, and Annie was struck by her left ear. The couple was discovered at 7 a.m. that next morning by the bakery driver as he was delivering his morning bread. And Louis and Annie were both still alive. The hatchet that was used on this couple was found in the bathroom of the quarters. It belonged to Louis. Now, Annie would immediately state that the attacker was a dark-skinned man. So police immediately ended up arresting an African-American man who had worked at Louis's store a week prior. Now, there was completely no evidence that this poor man did anything, but because Annie had said it was a dark-skinned man, and apparently this man gave a conflicting account of where he was that night, so he was arrested immediately. Now, again, robbery was not a motive because nothing was taken, even the cash out of the cash register in the store. Police ended up releasing the African-American man because there was no evidence that he did anything. Then, scandal. The media found out that Louis was actually married, and Annie was his mistress. And Louis was having an affair. Louis's wife had been traveling and seeing family in Cincinnati at the time. Now, Annie, in an effort to, squash this embarrassment of the scandal that broke out, she started throwing out some really wild accusations to the police and even contradicted her previous statements of what happened that night. So as police was searching the place, they found this trunk, and it had a whole bunch of different letters in it that was written by Louis. And the letters were written in German, Russian, and Yiddish. This led police to believe that Louis was a spy. And they arrested Louis for being a spy. They talked to Annie, and then Annie, of course, jumps on this bandwagon and says, you know what? Louis is a spy. It's all coming together. Now, 2 days after all of this happened and Louis was arrested, he was actually released because they found out that he wasn't really a spy. And actually, 2 policemen were demoted because of their shoddy police work. So Louis was free for a time. See, in comes Annie again. Louis was arrested again after Annie, just all her memories come flooding back about that night, and she actually pointed the finger at Louis himself. And she said, he's attacked me before with that same hatchet a month ago. Now, due to Annie's allegations, Louis was found guilty, and he spent 9 months in prison before he appealed. and they redid the trial and discovered after 15 minutes of deliberation that he actually had nothing to do with this. His own head injury was pretty bad, and even if he hit himself to cover up the crime of trying to take Annie out for whatever reason, he wouldn't have hit himself that hard. So he was acquitted. As for Annie, she had a partial paralysis in her face from the attack. And so about 7 weeks after the attack, she went under surgery to try to correct that on her face. Unfortunately, the surgery didn't go well, and 2 days later, she died. Now, the next attack took place only 9 days later, on August 5th, 1918. Anna Schneider was a young woman who was 8 months pregnant at the time. She was sleeping in her own bed. Her husband was not home because he was working the night shift. Now, when her husband did come home around midnight, he walked into the residence to find Anna laying in bed all bloody and teeth were missing. Anna was bludgeoned with some object and her scalp was cut, but luckily Anna did survive the attack. She told authorities that she awoke to see a large looming figure standing over her bed, and then nothing after that. Again, nothing was missing from the house, and police found a bloody lamp that they thought was used on Anna. 2 days after the attack, Anna gave birth to a very healthy baby girl, and she stated she never remembered the attack after seeing the looming phantom-like man standing over her. Now, police were kind of patrolling the area outside Anna's residence, and there was a man named James that came walking down the street, and he saw police and just started running. So of course police took chase, captured him, and arrested him, and they did think that he had something to do with Anna's attack. He was released a couple days later because there was no evidence that he had anything to do with the attack, and he stated that he ran because he's an ex-convict and been arrested so many times that they thought every time he sees a policeman, he thinks that he's going to be arrested. Maybe think about your life, James, and turn it around. Now, at this time, authorities began to kind of put these 3 attacks together, and they began to speculate publicly that they may be all related. So the community was starting to get acquainted with who they called the Axeman. So just 5 days after Anna's attack, on August 10th, 1918, Joseph Romano was found by his nieces with serious blows to his head. Now, his nieces were awakened by some commotion in the other room. So when they entered the room, the attacker, the intruder, was actually fleeing the scene. And they stated the man was like a tall, dark figure, and that he was heavy set, wearing a dark suit and a slouched hat. The 2 nieces added that even though the intruder was kind of heavy set and big, that he was very nimble as he ran away, and so he was very light on his feet, which was a little unusual. Now, Joseph Romano survived his attack as well, even was able to walk to the ambulance that came to help him, but he did end up dying of head trauma in the hospital 2 days later. Joseph's house was ransacked, but again, nothing was taken. They found a bloodied axe in the backyard, and they discovered that one of the panels to the doors was chiseled away. Now, after this murder, the residents of New Orleans really started getting scared. Police were getting an onslaught of calls of people, saying that they were seeing the Axeman lurking in their neighborhood, and many men would call and stated that they would find axes in their backyards that weren't theirs. Most of families, the fathers or the patriarch of the family would end up staying up all night armed, watching over their family and watching that back door. Now, there was a retired detective. His name was John D'Antonio. And he was following these murders, and he started making some public statements. He stated that back in 1910 and 1911, there were several individuals killed in the similar manner, and this was probably the same killer. He went on to state that the killer probably was this mild-mannered, law-abiding citizen by day, but just had this dark side of them that they had to kill or attack by night, and the motivation was not robbery or anything like that. It was just this motivation to hurt people, which is really scary. So just a little bit of history. Back in 1910 and through 1911, there were 49 individuals killed, and they were all attacked in their home at night. Now, sometimes an axe was used, but sometimes they were just shot. The murders and the attacks stopped suddenly in 1911 with no explanation, and the community just breathed a sigh of relief. But it looked like these attacks were starting up again. So police... Hello! Hi, to my baby! I know it's your nose, yes you are. So police had started increasing their presence, patrolling the areas close to where these attacks happened. And the attacks did appear to stop for a time. 7 months later, on March 10th, 1919, screams were heard coming from the Cortimiglia house. Charles Cortimiglia lived with his wife Rosie and their 2-year-old daughter Mary. A neighbor named Lorlando Giordano, hearing the screams, ran to the residence. There he saw Rosie with a head wound, bleeding profusely, holding her deceased daughter Mary. Charles was laying on the floor, bleeding from the head as well. Rosie and Charles were rushed to the hospital, where they did have skull fractures, but they did survive the attack. Unfortunately, poor Mary did not. Again, nothing was taken from the home, and a bloody axe was found on the back porch of their home. The killer again gained entry by chiseling away a panel on the back door. Now, Rosie stated that she was laying in bed with her daughter Mary in her arms when she was attacked. When Charles came in to Rosie's screams, the attacker then went for Charles. Now, being distraught, Rosie then pointed the finger at 69-year-old neighbor Lorlando Giordano and his 18-year-old son Frank. Those are the neighbors that ran to their aid. Now, the problem with pointing the finger at Lorlando and Frank is that Lorlando was not in good health. He would have been too, weak to do this with an axe. And his son Frank was well over 6 feet tall and well over 200 pounds, so there was no way he would have fit through the panel in the door. Now, Charles would come out and deny Rosie's claims and say that these two men did not do anything, they were innocent, but unfortunately, Lorlando and Frank were both found guilty. The sentencing was that Lorlando was to spend the rest of his life in jail, and his son Frank was to hang. Now, fortunately, Rosie came to her senses, and she did admit that Lorlando and Frank had nothing to do with the murders, that the only reason that she pointed the finger at them was because she was trying to get rid of them, because they apparently were business rivals. So fortunately, she confessed this before Frank was hanged, so both Lorlando and Frank were then set free. Charles was so upset with his wife Rosie that he ended up divorcing her. Now, 5 days after this attack, the Axeman allegedly wrote a letter to the newspaper in New Orleans, and that letter read, "Hot as hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal of New Orleans, the Axeman. They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that sounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians our foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis, Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as the most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be so much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens and the worst, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans in my infinite mercy, and I'm going to make a little proposition for you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, and it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fancy. Signed, the Axeman. So the night he alluded to in his letter was March 19th of 1919. And that night, the city came alive. All residents' homes played jazz on their radios and record players. And the residents that didn't have radios or record players went to dance halls and bars and parties where jazz bands played all night into the early morning hours. And no attacks happened that night. There was even a song, a jazz song, that was created specifically about the Axeman and became very popular. Now, 5 months would go by from the last attack, and on the night of August 10th, 1919, another Italian grocer was attacked. See a pattern here? His name was Steve Bocca. Now, Steve was able to sort of fight off the attacker, but he was still wounded, and he was able to run to his neighbor's house where he asked for help before falling unconscious. Again, the panel on the back door had been chiseled away. Nothing was taken from the home, and a bloody axe was found in the yard. Steve did recover from his injuries, but he only could remember that he woke to a dark figure looming over him and didn't remember much after the attack. The Axeman then struck again less than a month later on September 3rd of 1919 on a young woman named Sarah Lawman, and she was not Italian. Neighbors came to check on Sarah when she didn't show up for church, and when she did not answer the door, they ended up breaking into her house. They found Sarah in her bed, unconscious, bloody of the face, and missing teeth. The intruder had not chiseled away at the back door. Instead, Sarah had left her window open that night, feeling the cool air while you sleep, and the intruder had crawled through the window. A bloody axe was discovered on her front lawn, and again, nothing was taken from her home. Sarah would recover from the attack, but stated she has no memory of it. Now, the last known attack was on October 27th, 1919. Mike Pepitone and his wife Esther slept in separate bedrooms. Esther was awoken to a commotion coming from her husband's bedroom, and she went to check it out. She saw her husband had been struck in the head and was bleeding on the floor. Blood spatter covered most of the room, and Mike did end up dying of his injuries a couple hours later. A bloody axe was found near the back porch. Nothing was taken from the home, and Esther stated she saw 2 figures fleeing the scene, but she couldn't give any more details of what they looked like at the time. So who could this Axeman be? Now, some think that not all the murders were actually done by the Axeman. In the case of Mike Pepitone, the last victim, his wife stated there were 2 figures in the home, which nobody else had said there were 2 figures. There was speculation that Mike's murder was actually a mafia hit. The reason they thought it was a mafia hit is Mike's brother killed another mafia member prior, and they thought this was like a revenge killing for killing that person. You know how mafias work, right? Now, on that same kind of theory here, a crime writer had done a lot of research, and he stated that he thought the Axeman was a man named Joseph Mumfre. Now, Joseph Mumfre, coincidentally, was shot on December 5th, 1921 by Mike's widow, Esther. As the story goes, Esther had moved to California after Mike's murder, and she had remarried. Now, she was only married to this new man for 2 years when he suddenly went missing. He just disappeared. Nobody knew what happened. Now, Esther stated that her husband had some business with a man named Joseph Mumfre, and that man showed up at Esther's house after her husband went missing, and he demanded money, jewelry, or he was going to do to her what he did to her husband. Now, Esther was going to her jewelry box like she was going to comply, but instead she had a revolver hidden there, and she grabbed the revolver, turned around, and shot Joseph, killing him. Now, Esther was arrested for Joseph's murder, and Esther would tell the police that Joseph was one of the men who killed her first husband, Mike, back in New Orleans. Now, police looked into this, and allegedly, according to the newspaper article, they did find evidence that linked Joseph Mumfre to Mike's murder. In the end, Esther was acquitted of the shooting as it was deemed self-defense. Now, there's been some issue with this story because researchers haven't been able to find a man named Joseph Mumfre or a similar name like that in Los Angeles getting shot, nor could they find where an Esther Pepitone or an Esther Albano, which was her new married name, had been arrested and shot somebody. There was no court documents or nothing like that. So it's a question of, did this really happen? Now, of course, records can be lost, especially when they're that old, and who knows what sort of corruption was happening back then as well. And also, Esther stated that she saw 2 men, and she never mentioned these 2 men again. She just said that that was Joseph Mumfre. So was she telling the truth? Was she lying? Or was this some weird way that she needed to give herself closure from the death of her first husband? But before you answer, hold that thought and listen to this. Now, just because they couldn't find a man with that name that got shot, they did find a man with that name, sort of. There was a man named Frank Doc Mumfre, and he often went by the alias Leon Joseph Mumphrey. Now, he spelled this a whole bunch of different ways. Now, by the research, when he was Frank Mumphrey, his name was spelled Mumprey, but when he went by an alias, he spelled it a whole bunch of different ways, like Mumfre, Mom, Man. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways that he apparently spelled this name. So you can understand how researchers might have had a hard time finding that name. Anyway, a little history about Frank. Now, Frank was heavily involved in the mafia. That was a fact that researchers can prove. And back then, grocers were often used as fronts for criminal activity within the mafia. And if a grocer fell on the wrong side of the mafia, well, they were taken out. Now, Frank was involved in a kidnapping in 1907, and in 1908, he actually blew up a grocery store. And he did other various crimes to the Italian community, including blackmailing them and extorting them. Now, due to this blackmailing and extortion, he was caught for his crimes and jailed in 1911. Now, as we alluded to earlier, there was a string of killings in 1910 and 1911, and it suddenly stopped in 1911, right? Frank was jailed in 1911 for various crimes, and he was also suspected of a bunch of mafia killings, especially where Italian grocers were killed. Now, Frank started his prison sentence in 1911, and then he got out in 1918. The Axeman killings, the first one that they have on record, May of 1918. The Axeman's killings stopped suddenly in 1919, and coincidentally, Frank had moved. Frank had moved from New Orleans to California. Here's the other thing, is when I looked up Frank Doc Mumphrey's find a grave information, his date of death, December 5th, 1921. That's the date Esther, Mike's widow, stated she shot Joseph Mumphrey. Coincidence? Read into that as you may. So that's the main theory. Now, there are other theories too. Another theory is that there were copycats. Do you want to come say hi? Darth Kittius would like to say hi, everybody. Say hi, everybody. I just woke up, so I'm a little pissy. I know, you just don't like vaccines, do you? It's okay, it'll be better. I know. My poor baby girl. Alright, I'll put you over by the food. I know. I'm telling you, that little girl, she already has attitude, so we'll see what she does when she gets bigger. Okay, so where were we at? Okay, copycats. That was another theory, that the Axeman wasn't responsible for all those murders. For example, Sarah Lauman. She was an Italian, so there was really no connection of why the Axeman would take her out. There was speculation that maybe somebody targeted her for some reason and wanted to hurt her or take her out, and they did it in the same fashion that an Axeman would do to cover their crime. I mean, if that's the case, they did a good job because they blamed the Axeman immediately. Now, the other theory out there, that the Axeman was a true supernatural being, and that he was able to turn himself into a mist or a fog in order to gain entry into these small panels, and then once he was in the residence, he turned into a big hulking man. I mean, after all, if the Axeman chiseled the panels of the doors, if you look at your door panel, they're, usually a child can fit through it, and a man would have a hard time getting through it. But the witnesses are all saying that they saw this large looming man, which, I mean, if you're in your bed and you're looking up and just see a shadow, that could be too. I mean, it could be exaggerated. Do you believe in the supernatural? Of course, this case is still considered unsolved. a mystery, so we may never know who the Axeman really was. It's times like this I wish we had like a crystal ball we could just peer into back in time and see the truth. I'm not talking like a time machine to physically go back in time, just to peer back in time so nobody could screw up the timeline while they were back there. I mean, I wouldn't trust anyone to go back and not screw something up or step on a bug or something. Have you seen the movie Sound of Thunder? If you haven't, check it out. It's about this dumbass who is not happy with hunting in the present and goes back in time to hunt a dinosaur. And he steps on a butterfly. And this seemingly small, insignificant thing that happened, back in BC has a huge effect on present day when they come back. It's actually a pretty decent movie. And now I want to go watch it. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. If you would like to become a feline friend, please hit that subscribe button. And if you would like to become a feline fan, please hit that join button for special perks. Thanks everyone for listening today, and sleep well tonight.